As the shard of light merges with Liloupar's magic bottle, you feel a little of your own power being pulled away. Through the genie's entranced eyes, you see flaring flames and blunt blades. You see the freezing moonlight and viscous honey. Through the golden honey, you see the underlying scheme. The princess sees the consequences of her innocuous error, her sanity giving way to madness. Her invincible husband is shaken by the tragedy, his greedy heart blinded by ecstasy. All the sorrow, joy, and madness are finally turned into food for the Jinn mother to devour. It is curtains for the carnivorous night of honey. Such is the end of the genie's lover and the golden city of Gurabad. However, the fall of Gurabad is just a prologue. It merely revealed what torments yet await. In the last video, we talked about the three god kings' history and the tales of Gurabad. Not knowing the new info in 3.4, we made quite some errors in that video, but don't worry. As for today's episode, we will clear them out for you. The scattered pieces of information keep Gurabad's story mostly chaotic and have no clear arrangement. Still, it did leave some proven facts that we can use to learn more about the city's past and its distinctive ruins, particularly first-hand information from one of the notable characters that appeared in the book Tale of Shirin and Shiruya. So what really happened during Gurabad's time? I believe we have to go back to the first error we made, the one behind the assassination of King Ormazd and the orchestrator of Gurabad's ruin. Spoilers ahead, so if you still need to play the world quests, be sure to be prepared for what you are about to know. When exploring the old ruins in the desert of Hadramaveth, we would go on to form a team with Jet, who was in a state of grief, and making a wish for her parents' remains to be brought and buried in the eternal oasis. Along the way, we also learn from the story behind the mysterious being known as Liloupar, called the Mother of the Jinn, the same Liloupar who fell in love with the shepherd Ormazd. Now, I would like to add a quick revision to Ormazd's backstory. Remember that in the book Tale of Shirin and Shiruya, it doesn't specifically mention how Ormazd first met Liloupar, even in the Artifact Desert Pavilion Chronicle. It only mentions that Liloupar found her choice and fell in love with him because he possessed a heart of iron and is not easily tempted by corruption. But since 3.4 released, we now have a clear story. From one of the nameless tablets scattered, Ormazd describes the terrible time they live in under the rule of Uvashtra the Tyrant. Due to this, King Deshret encouraged him to take up arms and mobilize an army to defeat this tyrant king. After he put an end to Uvashtra's life, King Deshret proceeded to send Liloupar and help him build the city of Gurabad and gathered the scattered tribes in the desert. Then, to put it shortly, they fell in love, ruled as king and queen, and paid homage to King Deshret and his city of Ai-Khanum. I would also like to add that Ormazd helped King Deshret build his mausoleum, the Great Pyramid we see in the middle of the desert. So these mausoleums we see here were built by the three of them, King Deshret, Ormazd, and the Jinn. Going back to Liloupar, this actually adds more explanation to why she acted the way she did to Ormazd. If you played the world quests, she actually mentions him a lot and seems to show some sense of regret and sadness. Rightfully so. This was because the humble shepherd she once loved and looked up to turned into those kings she despised the most. A gentle king turned tyrant who undid his past actions by maintaining slavery across the desert of Sumeru. She saw this as a betrayal on her end, so she punished Ormazd across 3 generations of his family. This included Kisra and Shirin and their would-be son, Shiruya. From this punishment, she manipulated both Kisra and Shirin to assassinate King Ormazd using poison honey. His 300 children would also fall victim to this plot, and soon, with no other descendants left, the throne passed to Kisra and Shirin. Despite the great power they inherited, it left them regretful of their actions, as Shirin could not contain the guilt and shame after her father's death. As for Kisra, he felt only happiness, as the death of Ormazd meant the rise of his kinghood. The pain and punishment imposed on them made Liloupar rejoice, as her revenge against Ormazd made her tear down everything around him. Although from the quests, she mentions that the Jinn weren't always like this, and that the anguish of Nabu Marikata's death removed everything good in them to become wicked and sadistic creatures. As the citizens of Gurabad mourned the death of their king Ormazd, Kisra and Shirin took on the mantle as the new rulers of the city. Its vassal cities such as Tula and Saleh sent emissaries to Gurabad and declared allegiance to the new king. Now, in the previous video, I mentioned that Kisra was nursed by Gognas and was adopted into Ormazd's household. However, if you've played the quests, it's revealed that Kisra and Shirin were actually related by blood. It's not sure if Ormazd and Shirin were aware of this or not, but in most cases when a married pair is blood related, their children would be born with a birth defect. Side effects include an increased risk of infertility, miscarriage, heart conditions, and facial asymmetry. Take note of the last one, facial asymmetry. We already know that Kisra and Shirin had a son who was Shiria, and following the plot behind Ormazd, Kisra did not want to fall under the same curse as his father. Fearing this, he banished Shiria from Gurabad and gave him a brass mask. The question is, why would he give him this mask? There are two possible answers to this. It's either Kisra doesn't want the public to know the identity of his son, or it's either his face was deformed due to a birth defect acquired from the ancestral relationship. It isn't that of a big deal, but it adds more proof to Kisra and Shirin being blood related. Now, moving on. After Kisra banished his son, he started to perform his duties as king. Beginning his reign, he desired unlimited power, higher than what his adopted father possessed. It is here where the signet ring he obtained from Liloupar turned him from a respectable hero to a power-hungry tyrant. He began construction of many temples, workshops, farms, and factories to expand his kingdom's gain. Many of these were built using slave labor from the different tribes and cities he once conquered. This process was so brutal that many slaves were dying day and night due to overworked schedules, the heat of the scorching sun, and the lack of proper provisions. Still, Kisra thought this to be slow and needed to generate more, so Liloupar helped him by designing a machinery that would be powered by Jinn fragments. These Jinn fragments were the product of her daughter Shirin, and were described to be mindless and malformed. Eventually, with the success of using such machinery to speed up production, Kisra forced Shirin to produce more Jinn fragments, which eventually caused her to suffer a lot and lose half of her humanity. After this, Liloupar also used the knowledge of the Abyss to give the idea to Kisra in building a colossal machine that would bring him untold wealth. This would be known as the Ruin Golems, a technology that can swallow up and spit out a torrent of artificial objects, and would be powered by Jinn fragments. In fact, we can see more of these scattered throughout Sumeru. Now, early in his reign, Kisra was becoming more rich and powerful as the days went on, but then encountered a very large problem. The Ruin Golem and the machines fueled by the Jinn fragments were proving to be very effective, much more than the countless slaves that he owned in the city. So he decided to abolish slavery and set them free from their owners. However, this started another problem. As the freed slaves were no longer paid by their owners, they needed jobs to live. Yet with the machines that were already doing pretty much all the work, they could do nothing but to either stay and die or leave Gurabad and wander the hot desert. Kisra needed to find a solution to this problem, otherwise a grave consequence would be waiting for him. As the populace were jobless and had no way to sustain their life, civil unrest was growing within Gurabad. To make matters worse, rumors of a rebellion were stirring up trouble as volunteers joined the ranks of the man only known as Khorramdin, the savior of commoners and slaves. This name, which was first mentioned in the primal obelisks, was in truth Shiria, convinced by his mother to take up arms and don the brass mask as a symbol of his defiance. Gradually, his rebel troops grew by the thousands and began to stir up trouble by tearing down statues of Kisra and burning the temples, killing the high priests and priestesses. This was now the beginning of the Great Revolt, a time where the masses with rags and brass masks took up arms against Kisra's guards and his construct forces. Despite being beaten by better equipped royal guards from time to time, Shuria's rebels continued to attack and stir havoc within the city. Due to this, regulations have become more strict as the worship of Nabu Malikata, the goddess of flowers, has surprisingly been banned by the high priests because, for various reasons, these slaves were once the people of Nabu Malikata and believed that she is still alive, sleeping within the eternal oasis. As a repercussion, anyone caught worshipping Nabu Malikata would be punished and killed. Now, from the sources, the Great Revolt lasted for more than 13 days, leaving the city in smoke and ash, hundreds of bodies lying down in the streets, and the ruined state of the temples. One account from the records of Gurabad tells us all what we need to know. The Annex temple is burning. The high priest was dragged away. Haba found him while investigating the area, but not all his parts could be recovered. Perhaps they were fueled by overwhelming hunger or anger. It is the 13th day of the Great Revolt. The temple guards have resisted 4 charges this day alone. These people were dressed in rags, but they bore brass masks. They have retreated for now, but will almost certainly be back. General Hiberus has gone to see His Majesty. Perhaps this is the last time we shall see mighty Parvesravan give a royal order in person. As horrible as this time was, the rebels were starving, and to add to that, the irrigation system that once sustained the gardens of Gurabad were now beginning to dry out, as sand and mud were now pouring out from the canals with no water to be found. This added more fuel to the fire, as the people were now not only jobless, but were also dying. So they looted every temple, every noble's house searching for food and water. If that wasn't enough, the account earlier also hinted at cannibalism being done, as the high priest's body parts could not be recovered. Eventually, the Brass Mask Revolts was nearing its end, as Shirya managed to kill Kisra and usurp his throne, becoming the new king and reuniting with his mother. In his short reign, he had an heir named Kavusbai, whose mother isn't mentioned. With the aftermath of his rebellion, together with the drought of the oasis, he shouldered the problems encountered by his father, thus bringing Gurubad's state to an all-time low. On top of all that, Shirya fell to his death due to a chasm that formed within the city. From here, a plague emerged and caused the deaths of the surviving citizens. The people turned on each other and even blamed Kavusbai for his father's sins, believing that Shirya's plague was a punishment brought by the heavens. Here, Kavusbai was banished from Gurabad, having to tread the same path as his father once did. But he doesn't end here, as we will continue his story in part 3 of this video, the War of the 7 City-States. Now, I read a somewhat small theory that Liloupar was the one who manipulated Shirya to rebel. In hindsight, what if the one who met Shirya and the Moon Temple wasn't Shirin but Liloupar instead? This theory actually gives more sense to Liloupar's nature. Now, going back on topic, while Shirya may have become the new king, this didn't last long since the city was destroyed and dragged into the earth soon after. The great city, reduced to its former glory. 3 generations of kings died, a widowed mother who became mad and was dubbed as the Demon Queen, and a genie who caused all of this to happen. In fact, all of this happened while King Deshret was away. Now, where was he all this time? That we will answer in the next chapter. But before we conclude this story, what happened next? Well, according to the primal obelisks, at some point after the destruction of Gurubad, King Deshret returned from his search and was angered at the state of the great city. As punishment, King Deshret split Liloupar's soul into 7 fragments and imprisoned her strongest fragments at Liloupar's Gaol. There she would be guarded by King Deshret's constructs and would stay there for all eternity. That is, until we, the Traveler, managed to free her and return her memories by collecting the 7 Jinn fragments scattered throughout the city's ruins. At the end of the world quest, Memories of Gurabad, Liloupar mentions that Shirin and Shirya may still live in the fallen city, probably as some kind of fallen spirits. This may hint at some form of future event or a future world boss. Liloupar also says, the power of the darkness is growing stronger. Only a mother's power can face it head-on. I thought I could use the dark abyss to punish that which I hated. But what goes around, comes around. It shall also be my destiny to enter Gurabad and face its retribution. After this exchange, Liloupar greets us goodbye and leaves, entering the city of Gurabad located underneath. Now with that story concluded, you might be wondering, where was King Deshret, and when did his death fit into this timeline? Well, from what we have been able to gather, we could guess that King Deshret was present from Ormazd to Shiria's reign. Reading the primal obelisk in the Passage of Ghouls, after His Majesty King Deshret's mighty form faded from mortal eye, the human King Parvesravan, an age like gold, no longer was there slavery or war, and the scattered tribes and nations paid homage. The miracle of Gurubad shall be open for all to see. This is told from the perspective of one of King Parvesravan's retainers at that time. Now before all of the family drama would happen in Gurabad, King Deshret was busy ruling his city of Ikanum, together with his 3 retainers whom I mentioned in the 2nd chapter. Despite building an eternal oasis, a magnanimous city in dedication to the goddess of flowers, King Deshret was still haunted by her death. He missed her greatly, and even the songs of the nightingale and aroma of roses could not pull him from his sorrow, as mentioned in the Lay of Al-Ahmar. While the city of Ikanum did experience years of peace, King Deshret was being urged by his 3 retainers to continue his ambition of chasing forbidden knowledge. These 3 retainers believed that with knowing such understanding, King Deshret's power would continue to grow, as if he wasn't powerful enough already. At his throne, the 3 retainers spoke to him individually. It was the Goat King who approached first, and told him that lingering in the past memories won't be able to obtain power that could potentially surpass even the heavens themselves. King Deshret responded with but a single word: no. Next, it was the Ibis King's turn to convince their sorrowed king. This time the Ibis King told him that the 1,000 years of punishment brought by Celestia took control of wisdom and history. So as a counteraction, King Deshret must take control of the past to have a better future. Still, even though the Ibis King's words were tempting, King Deshret responded with another no. 2 chances have already been risked, and so it was up to the Crocodile King to make his move. As he stepped forth, he spoke. If we are to recall the lost lives and welcome lost opportunities and dreams back into the fold, then this is our final chance. The greater the authority, the greater the emptiness. The greater the wisdom, the greater the sorrow. Forget the delusions of the void. Only resurrection and eternal life can fill the endless pit of regret. It was here when King Deshret finally accepted and built himself a temple, filled with mazes and having a place to lay, where he sacrifices his body to search for forbidden knowledge. This is the mausoleum of King Deshret, located in the Great Red Sand. With the help of the Jinn, King Ormazd and his slaves, the mausoleum was built, along with the 3 pyramids we see on the map. From the book The Lay of Al-Ahmar, King Deshret separated his mind from his body, somewhat hinting he went into a cosmic sleep, similar to what happened with Samael from the Golden Slumber Quest. With his pursuit of forbidden knowledge, his absence proved consequential to his subjects, particularly Gurabad, where the family drama was now taking place. He would finally return after the Brass Mask revolt, punishing Liloupar, but also unleash the plague that killed not only Gurubad's citizens, but also the cities of Ikanum, Kajnisut, and the surrounding tribes. This ties in where during Shiria's short reign as king, a type of sickness spreads in his city and half of Gurubad is dead. Powerless as King Deshret was to stop this spread, it was here that Greater Lord Rukkhadevata came from the rainforests and helped the land heal. So she ordered the 7 great sages to construct 7 towers that assisted in suppressing the curse brought by the forbidden knowledge. However, the stain still remains as long as King Deshret is alive, so to save his remaining people and preserve the legacy of his lover Nabu Malikata, he sacrificed himself, officially marking the end of the 3 god kings in Sumeru. And so with these new 7 temples, the surviving people of the desert rebuilt new communities which soon grew into cities that mark the landscape of Sumeru. Without King Deshret's presence now to guide them, a new era of humanity begins. In part 3 of this video, we will now be delving into the histories between the 7 city-states of Sumeru. With the fall of the capital Gurabad, These cities such as Tulaitula and Saleh became independent with kings serving as the ruling party. Soon each of these kings desired to be great, equaling themselves with King Ormazd's power, a king of kings as they say. This would spark a series of wars that would ravage the surviving people of King Deshret and Abu Malikata. Before we end, I hope I've managed to correct the errors we made on the first video, as it was sourced from information that wasn't present before 3.4's release. If you believe I have made other errors, feel free to type it in the comments, and I'll try pinning it for all the viewers to see. I also have to admit that I took some parts from the books such as the tale of Shiroye and Shirin and the Lay of Al-Ahmar quite literally. Some details such as if there was any giant bird that raised Kisra, or if Ormazd really did have 300 children, could have been overdone to place more interest in the story. Still, I think this is the charm of reading Genshin's lore, as it allows us to be imaginative and lets us be more critical about it, like studying real-life tales and stories. Also, I've read that some of you guys want to look at the timeline we have made, and we'd like to share it soon, after we have finished this series about Sumeru's history. As for the maps we have made, we'll be sharing a link if you're interested in looking at them in more detail, and feel free to correct some mistakes we have made by typing them in the comments. Now as always, if you're still watching, thank you, and if you want to know the next events, click for part 3 here.